The condo party was in full swing when David and I arrived. The loud music, flashing colored lights, and laughter echoing through the hall created a festive and relaxed atmosphere. David, always sociable, quickly mingled with the neighbors, leaving me a little adrift. It was then that I saw Jack, the new neighbor from the apartment next door, leaning against the balcony, watching the scene with a distant gaze. Our gazes met, and at that moment, something changed. "Hi, Jack. Enjoying the party?" I asked, trying to sound casual as my heart beat faster. "Yes, it's interesting to see so many people together," he replied, with an enigmatic smile. There was something in his gaze that held me, a latent tension that I couldn't ignore. As we talked on the balcony, the atmosphere seemed charged with electricity. Every word exchanged increased the tension between us, and it was as if the world around us disappeared. I felt an unexpected warmth surge through my body, and part of me wanted to run away from the feeling, but another, stronger part of me urged me on. "Shall we go for a walk?" Jack suddenly suggested, looking towards the most secluded area of the garden. Without thinking too much, I agreed. Sure, why not? We moved away from the party, leaving the music and voices behind. The garden was silent, lit only by the soft light of the moon. Jack seemed more relaxed, but I was increasingly nervous. We walked to a more hidden corner, where he turned to me, his penetrating gaze meeting mine. "You look different today," he commented with a slight smile. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to control my trembling voice. "More daring," he said, stepping a little closer. "I like that." His closeness took my breath away. I didn't know how to respond, but before I could think of anything, he raised his hand and touched my arm. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but the electricity between us made it impossible to ignore what was happening. "Jack, this isn't right," I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. "I know," he replied, his voice husky and intense. "But I can't stop." Before I could react, he moved even closer, and his lips touched mine. The kiss was brief, but charged with intensity. My body responded before my mind could protest, and for a second, everything seemed perfect. When we got back to the party, my heart was conflicted. David was in the middle of the dance floor, laughing and having fun with his friends. Guilt hit me like a wave, but at the same time, a part of me longed for more of that moment with Jack. What would I do next? We arrived at the condo party, David holding my hand tightly. It was a summer evening, and the atmosphere was full of laughter and lively conversation. David, my husband, was excited to socialize with the neighbors and make new friends. I, on the other hand, felt a little out of place. As soon as we entered, I noticed Jack on the other side of the hall. He was leaning against the wall, holding a glass of wine, and chatting to a group of people. Our gazes met for a moment, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something in the way he looked at me, a sparkle in his eyes that seemed to say much more than words could express. David went to say hello to some acquaintances, and I decided to get a drink. As I made my way to the bar, I felt someone approach. It was Jack. "Hi, I'm Jack. I guess we're neighbors, huh?" he said, with a charming smile. "Yes, I'm Anna. I live next door," I replied, trying to sound casual. We started chatting, and I soon realized that there was a growing tension between us. Jack was charming and had a way of speaking that mesmerized me. With every word, with every smile, the tension grew. We decided to go out onto the balcony, where the conversation became more intimate. "You seem a bit out of place here," he commented, looking straight into my eyes. "Yeah, maybe a little. I'm not really a fan of big parties," I confessed, feeling my heart race. He moved a little closer, and I could feel the warmth of his body. "I also prefer quieter places," he said softly. It was then that I made an impulsive decision. "Do you want to go for a walk?" I asked, hardly believing my own words. Jack smiled and nodded. We moved away from the party, walking towards the garden of the condominium. The silence of the night enveloped us, and each step seemed to carry an unspoken promise. Standing in the garden, Jack turned to me. "You're different, Anna. There's something about you that intrigues me." I felt my face flush. "I don't know what to say. You seemed interesting." He reached out and touched my arm, a hesitant touch, but full of electricity. Goosebumps broke out on my skin, and our gazes met again, this time more intensely. Without thinking, I moved closer, and he did the same. Our faces were centimeters apart. "This is crazy," I muttered, but I couldn't pull away. "Maybe it is," he replied, and before I could say anything, he kissed me. It was a stolen kiss, full of passion and pent-up desire. For a moment, I forgot everything. David, the party, the world around us. When we finally pulled away, reality came back full force. "I have to go back," I said, my voice shaking. "I know," Jack replied, with an understanding look. "But it doesn't end here, does it?" I shook my head, not knowing how to answer. I walked away quickly and returned to the party. As I entered, I saw David laughing and chatting animatedly. Guilt hit me like a wave, but at the same time, I couldn't get Jack out of my mind. David approached, putting his arm around my waist. "I was looking for you. Where were you?" "I went to get some air," I replied, trying to sound natural. He smiled and pulled me closer. "Let's enjoy the party then." While I tried to concentrate on the party and the people around me, my mind was miles away in the garden with Jack. Guilt and excitement mixed together, creating a whirlwind of emotions inside me. I knew that night would change everything, and that nothing would ever be the same. The next day dawned with a different weight, a mixture of guilt and excitement that I couldn't shake off. David was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, while I went downstairs, trying to look as natural as possible. He gave me a light kiss on the lips and smiled. "Morning, love. Did you sleep well?" he asked, oblivious to the turmoil inside me. "Yes, I did," I lied, trying to return the smile. But my mind was stuck on the night before, on Jack's touches, on the stolen kiss. After breakfast, I picked up my things and went to work. In the parking lot of the condominium, there was Jack, leaning against his car, waiting for me. His gaze met mine, and a complicit smile formed on his lips. My heart raced, and I knew he felt the same way. I walked past him, trying to keep my composure. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying an intimacy that only the two of us now understood. "Good morning," I replied, feeling the heat rise to my face. During the day, our secret messages began. At first they were simple, but loaded with hidden meaning. "I can't stop thinking about you," he wrote. "Me too," I replied, feeling a chill as I read his words. The messages got bolder, describing desires and wishes that were beginning to take hold of us. The growing excitement kept me in a constant state of alert, and the wait for the next meeting became unbearable. In the evening, when I got home, David was on the sofa, watching TV. He seemed so calm, so oblivious to everything. I sat next to him, trying to concentrate on the program, but my mind was far away, lost in the memories of the night before and the messages exchanged with Jack. The next day, I met Jack again in the parking lot. This time, he moved closer, and our gazes connected in a way that left no doubt about what we were feeling. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We met in the garden of the condominium, in a secluded corner. He came closer, and the hesitant but electric touch on my arm made my whole body react. "This is crazy," I said, trying to keep some sense of reason. "I know, but I can't help it," he replied, his eyes fixed on mine. We approached each other slowly, and when our lips met, it was as if the world around us disappeared. The first stolen kiss was intense, charged with a passion I hadn't felt for a long time. When I returned to the party, I saw David having fun with his friends, oblivious to what was going on. Guilt hit me hard, but the memory of Jack's kiss still burned on my lips. That night, lying next to David, my mind was elsewhere, remembering every detail of the encounter with Jack. I knew I was entering a dangerous path, but the excitement of experiencing something so intense and forbidden was irresistible. The next few days were a mixture of anxiety and desire. The secret text messages continued, getting bolder and bolder, and the wait for the next meeting became a delicious torture. Every time I saw Jack in the parking lot, my heart raced, and our glances and complicit smiles recalled the night before, fueling the flame that was growing between us. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. The excitement of experiencing something forbidden, of feeling an overwhelming passion again, was something I couldn't ignore. And so the wait for the next meeting with Jack became an obsession, a need I couldn't control. Every day the tension between us grew, and the wait for the next meeting became unbearable. I knew I was putting everything at risk, but the passion I felt for Jack was stronger than any fear. And so we kept exchanging glances and complicit smiles, bold messages and repressed desires, while guilt and excitement mixed in my heart. That night, I was restless. David was watching TV, as he always did after dinner, and I was trying to find an excuse to leave the house. "Love, I need to sort something out in the car. I'll be right back," I said, trying to sound casual. He just nodded, engrossed in the program on. I grabbed my keys and left, my heart pounding in my chest. I found Jack in the condominium garage, where the dim light of the lamps barely illuminated the room. He was leaning against his car, with that smile that was starting to make me breathless. "You came," he said, his voice low and husky. "Of course I came," I replied, trying to ignore the guilt that was beginning to build in my stomach. He took a step towards me, and the tension between us was palpable. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, his eyes fixed on mine. "Me too," I admitted, my voice almost a whisper. He moved closer, and before I could react, his lips were on mine in an overwhelming kiss, full of desire and urgency. Passion overtook us, and at that moment, nothing else mattered. Our hands explored every inch of each other's bodies, and the sensation of being so close to danger only added to the excitement. "Someone might see us," I whispered, trying to catch my breath. "Let them see," Jack replied, his eyes shining with an intensity that made me shiver. His touch was firm, but at the same time, there was a softness to it that made me feel even more surrendered. Feeling his hands on me, his warm breath against my skin, was an experience I had never had before. Every touch, every kiss, seemed to set my body on fire in a way I had never imagined. Time seemed to stand still, and for a few moments, I forgot everything. David, the guilt, the consequences. It was just me and Jack, caught up in a passion that seemed impossible to control. "You drive me crazy," he murmured against my lips, and I knew he felt the same way. Finally, we pulled away, panting, and with our hearts racing. "We need to be careful," I said, trying to regain my composure. "I know," he replied, his gaze still fixed on mine, "but I can't stay away from you." We went back to the party, trying to act normal. David was still in the living room, laughing with some neighbors. Guilt hit me like a punch in the stomach, seeing him so carefree. "Where were you?" he asked when I approached. "I went to check something in the car, but everything's fine now," I lied, trying to smile. As the night went on, I couldn't get Jack out of my head. Every glance, every smile we exchanged was a reminder of the intensity of what we had experienced in the garage. Guilt and excitement mixed together, creating a feeling I didn't know how to handle. When the party finally ended and we returned to our apartment, David was visibly tired. "I'm going to take a shower and go to sleep," he said, giving me a light kiss on the forehead. "I'm going to bed soon," I replied, trying to hide the turmoil of emotions inside me. Lying in bed next to David, my mind was still in the garage with Jack. The excitement and guilt were there, but there was something else, a feeling that my life was about to change irreversibly. And despite all the danger and fear, I couldn't help longing to see Jack again, to feel that overwhelming passion once more. That morning, I woke up with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. It was hard to concentrate on anything other than Jack. Ever since we met at the party in the apartment complex, something inside me had awakened. I didn't know how to deal with this new reality, but with each passing day, my desire for him only grew. Over breakfast, David was talking excitedly about a new project at work. I pretended to listen with interest, but my mind was far away. All I could think about were the messages Jack and I had been exchanging since the night before. Each message was bolder than the last, and I felt a chill in my stomach every time my cell phone vibrated. "We had a great night last night, don't you think?" he wrote. "I always think about you. And you?" I replied, feeling my heart race. David didn't suspect a thing. He was wrapped up in his routine, while I was playing a dangerous game of seduction. The messages with Jack became more and more explicit, describing our desires and wishes. It was impossible to ignore the chemistry between us. That afternoon, while I was working from home, I received a message from Jack. "I want to see you. Today." My heart raced. I knew I was playing with fire, but the temptation was irresistible. "I can't. David's here. Find an excuse. I need you." I knew I should stop, but the guilt and excitement mixed in such a way that I couldn't resist. So I made up an excuse about needing to buy something urgently at the market. David didn't get suspicious. He was so focused on the television that he barely noticed when I left. Jack was waiting for me in the parking garage. As soon as we saw each other, the tension was palpable. He pulled me into a secluded corner and kissed me with overwhelming passion. My body responded to his touch in a way I had never experienced before. "You're incredible," he murmured between kisses. "That's crazy," I replied, but I couldn't pull away. Every encounter with Jack was a risk, but also an escape from my monotonous life. The passion between us was uncontrollable, and I felt alive in a way I had never felt before. Even so, every time I returned home, guilt consumed me. Seeing David, oblivious to everything, made me question my choices, but my desire for Jack was stronger. One day, Jack suggested something different. "We need more privacy. Let's meet outside the condominium." The proposal scared me, but it also excited me. I knew that leaving the condominium would make everything even more risky. "Where do you suggest?" I asked. "How about a remote hotel? No one will see us there," I thought for a moment. The idea of being in a place where we could be ourselves, without fear of being discovered, was tempting. "All right, but what about David? Make up an excuse. You can do it." That night, I decided to tell David that I had an important work meeting the next day. He believed me without question. I felt a knot in my stomach, but the anticipation of meeting Jack was stronger. At the hotel, the passion between us reached a new level. We were free to explore our desires without restrictions. Every touch, every kiss, was charged with electricity. The total surrender to our repressed desires was an overwhelming experience. "You're everything I've ever wanted," said Jack, as he caressed my face. "I feel the same way," I replied, lost in his eyes. But even in that moment of satisfaction, guilt haunted me. I knew I was betraying David, the man with whom I had shared so many years of my life. The pain of this betrayal was real, but the attraction to Jack was irresistible. When I returned home, guilt mixed with satisfaction. David was in the living room, waiting for me with a smile. "How was the meeting?" he asked. "It was good. I sorted out everything I needed to," I replied, trying to hide the turmoil inside me. With each passing day, I found it harder to keep my composure when I saw Jack at the condominium. David began to notice my distant behavior, and I knew I was walking a fine line. Constant fantasies about Jack filled my mind, even when I was next to David. Despite all the fear and guilt, I decided to continue the case. Jack made me feel alive, and I didn't want to lose that. I knew the risks and the consequences, but the attraction between us was stronger than anything. That night, lying next to David, I promised myself that I would find a way to balance these two parallel lives. The constant adrenaline and passion for Jack were now part of my reality, and I was willing to face any challenge to keep it that way. Thus began a new phase in my life, where betrayal and desire intertwined in a way I never imagined possible. I looked at David as he prepared to leave. He was so excited about the condo party that I almost felt a pang of conscience for what I was about to do. I made up a last-minute work meeting, something I'd done a few times before, and he believed me without blinking. "Will you be all right without me?" I asked, trying to hide my guilt. David smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Of course, love. Enjoy your meeting and don't worry about me." I left the house with my heart racing, driving to a hotel outside the city where Jack and I had agreed to meet. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting in the lobby. The look in his eyes made me forget for a moment the lie I had told David. "You came," Jack said, with a smile that made my whole body vibrate. "I couldn't stay away," I replied, feeling a mixture of excitement and guilt. We went up to the bedroom together, and as soon as the door closed behind us, the tension that had been building over the last few encounters exploded. Jack pulled me close, his lips meeting mine with an urgency I couldn't resist. "I've been waiting for this all day," he murmured against my mouth. I couldn't reply. All I could do was surrender to the moment, letting it guide me. Every touch, every kiss, it was as if the world around us disappeared. My body responded to his in a way I had never experienced before. "I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered, as his hands slid over my skin. "Me too," I confessed, feeling my voice tremble. "But we can't go on like this forever." Jack stopped and looked at me, his eyes filled with an intensity that left me breathless. "I know, but as long as it lasts, I want to enjoy every moment." Those words hit me like a wave. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't turn away. The passion we felt for each other was overwhelming, and in that hotel room, far away from everything and everyone, we gave ourselves over completely. Afterwards, lying side by side, the silence was only interrupted by the sound of our breathing. Jack stroked my hair, and I felt a mixture of satisfaction and guilt. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, I am," I replied, although part of me knew I was lying. "But I have to go. David will start to get suspicious." I stood up and started to get dressed. Jack watched me, a sad look in his eyes. "I hate to see you go like this." "Me too," I admitted, feeling a lump in my throat. "But it's what we've got, at least for now." We said goodbye with a long, painful kiss, and I left the hotel with a heavy heart. The journey home was a whirlwind of emotions. I felt torn between the passion I felt for Jack and the guilt for betraying David. When I got home, David was in the living room, watching TV. He turned to me with a warm smile. "How was the meeting?" "It was good, but tiring," I replied, trying to sound natural. He stood up and hugged me, and I felt a tightness in my chest. "I'm glad you're home. I missed you." "I missed you too," I lied, the weight of guilt growing inside me. I lay down next to him on the sofa, trying to enjoy the moment, but my mind was racing. The memory of meeting Jack was still burning on my skin, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking a fine line. I spent the rest of the night trying to act normally, but guilt and satisfaction mixed in my mind. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but the intensity of my feelings for Jack was something I couldn't ignore. While David slept next to me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. The desire for Jack, the guilt for betraying David, and the uncertainty of where it would all lead. It was a path of no return, and I knew that with every step I took, it would be harder to go back. Getting back into the routine after meeting Jack wasn't easy at all. Every time I saw him in the condominium, my heart beat faster. It was as if an invisible magnet connected us, and I could barely keep my composure. David began to notice that I was different, more distant. He'd ask if everything was all right, and I'd always say yes, that it was just work stressing me out. But the truth was much more complicated. Fantasies about Jack took over my mind, even when I was next to David. I felt terrible about it, but I couldn't help it. The desire was too strong. Jack and I continued to exchange messages, each time more daring and full of ulterior motives. He made a point of reminding me how much I attracted him, and I reciprocated, feeding that fire that insisted on not going out. One day, while we were having breakfast, David looked at me with eyes full of concern. "Are you sure everything's all right?" he asked, holding my hand across the table. I smiled, trying to look as convincing as possible. "Yes, love. It's just work, nothing to worry about." He nodded, but I knew he wasn't completely convinced. The guilt weighed heavily on my shoulders, but at the same time, the thought of giving up on Jack seemed unbearable. I was torn between two worlds, and giving up either of them seemed impossible. One night, after an intense exchange of messages with Jack, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to see him again. I made up an excuse for David, saying I was going to the market to buy some things that were missing. He didn't even notice, and just waved his hand without taking his eyes off the TV. I left the house and went straight to the condominium garage, where Jack was already waiting for me. As soon as I saw him, my heart raced. He smiled that breathless smile and pulled me into a darker corner. "I missed you," he whispered, holding my face with his hands. "Me too," I replied, before kissing him. The kiss was intense, full of desire and urgency. I knew it was dangerous, that we could be discovered at any moment, but that only added to the excitement. When we finally broke apart, I was panting. "We need to be careful," I said, trying to catch my breath. "I know," he replied, stroking my cheek, "but I can't stay away from you." Those words moved me in a way I hadn't expected. I felt a mixture of fear and excitement, and I realized that I was willing to take any risk to keep going. Over the next few days, I tried my best to act normally around David, but it was difficult. With every chance meeting with Jack in the condominium, the tension grew. The complicit glances, the hidden smiles, everything contributed to the feeling of living on an emotional roller coaster. David started to become more attentive, and I knew he suspected something. He watched me more closely and asked more detailed questions about my day. I tried hard not to be suspicious, but the guilt and fear of being found out were always there. One evening, while we were having dinner, David asked a question that left me cold. "Are you sure everything is all right between us?" he asked, his eyes fixed on mine. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I tried to look unconcerned, but inside I was panicking. "You seem distant, different, as if your mind was somewhere else." I swallowed, trying to find an answer that sounded convincing. "I'm just tired, love. Work has been hard." He nodded, but didn't seem entirely convinced. I knew I needed to be more careful, but at the same time, I couldn't resist Jack. The decision to continue the case, even with the constant fear of being found out, seemed to be the only option for me at that moment. After dinner, while David was in the shower, I received a message from Jack. He wanted to see me that evening. My heart raced. I replied quickly, arranging to meet somewhere more secluded in the condominium. I said goodbye to David, telling him I was going for a walk to clear my head and headed for the agreed location. Jack was already there, waiting for me with that smile that attracted me so much. As soon as I arrived, he pulled me into his arms and kissed me with all the passion we felt for each other. The guilt was there, but at that moment, it seemed small in the face of the desire that consumed us. "I can't stay away from you," he whispered between kisses. "Neither can I replied, giving myself completely to that moment. As we kissed, reality seemed to disappear, and all that mattered was being there, in his arms. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. Jack was my addiction, and I was willing to pay the price for it. When I got home, David was already asleep. I lay down next to him, feeling the weight of guilt and satisfaction mix inside me. I knew that the routine would be increasingly difficult to maintain, but at that moment, all I could think about was when the next meeting with Jack would be. Creating new excuses to meet Jack became a skill I never imagined I had. Every time David asked me about my plans, my heart would race. I'd say that I needed to sort something out at work, or that I was meeting a friend. He always believed me, perhaps because I never gave him any reason to suspect. My passion for Jack was more intense than ever. Our encounters became more frequent and more daring. That feeling of living two parallel lives was addictive. When I was with Jack, I felt alive, wanted. But the adrenaline rush was accompanied by constant fear. One morning, while I was getting ready for work, David noticed a mark on my neck. "What's that, love?" he asked, gently touching the marked skin. My heart almost stopped. "Oh, I think it's the necklace I wore yesterday," I lied, trying not to look nervous. He accepted the explanation, but I began to realize that hiding the marks of betrayal was becoming increasingly difficult. One afternoon, I received a message from Jack. "Meet you today, same time." My heart raced. "Yes, I can't wait," I replied, feeling the anticipation grow. After work, I made an excuse for David and went to meet Jack. When I arrived, he pulled me into a passionate kiss. "I've missed you so much," he whispered against my lips. "Me too," I replied, letting myself be carried away by the intensity of that moment. Every encounter was a roller coaster of emotions. The adrenaline of being so close to danger, the excitement of being with Jack, the fear of being discovered. It was like living in a constant state of alert. Once, we were in Jack's car, parked in a secluded spot. He held my hand and looked me in the eye. "You know this is crazy, don't you?" he said with a half smile. "Yes, but I can't stop," I replied, feeling a mixture of guilt and desire. Our encounters became more intense every day. The passion we felt for each other was undeniable, but along with this passion came the need to create ever more elaborate lies. One day, while I was with Jack, I received a message from David saying that he would be home early. I panicked. "I have to go," I said hurriedly. "What's wrong?" asked Jack, worried. "David's coming home early. I need to be there before he does," I explained. We left in a hurry, and I managed to get home before David. But the feeling of living two lives was consuming me. Being with Jack was like a drug, and I was addicted. Even knowing the risks, the pain it could cause David, I couldn't stop. With every encounter, every touch, I sank deeper into this abyss. David began to notice my different behavior. "Are you all right?" he asked one evening while we were having dinner. "Sure, I'm just a bit tired," I lied, trying to hide the guilt I felt. But the truth was that my mind was always on Jack. Fantasies about him occupied my thoughts, even when I was next to David. Every message from Jack, every clandestine meeting, fueled this forbidden passion. I knew I was playing with fire. At any moment, everything could fall apart. But the attraction to Jack was stronger than any fear. And so I continued to live this double life, trying to balance guilt and desire, hoping that the next lie would be convincing enough to keep everything a secret. Jack proposed a weekend getaway. It wasn't just a quick date or a secret meeting at the hotel. He wanted more time, more intimacy. The idea made me excited and nervous at the same time. How could I justify this to David? I paused and took a deep breath, thinking of a plausible excuse. I decided to tell him that I had a business trip. "David, the company wants me to attend a conference this weekend. It's important. I can't refuse." I lied, trying to sound casual. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and acceptance. "Of course, love, I understand. If it's important for your work, you have to go." On Friday, I packed my suitcase with an excitement that almost made me lose control. Every item of clothing, every perfume chosen, everything was designed for Jack. When I left the house, I gave David a quick kiss and told him I'd be back on Sunday evening. He smiled and wished me luck at the conference. I found Jack in a hotel far from the city. He was waiting in the lobby, and when he saw me, his smile lit up the room. I felt my heart race. He pulled me into a tight hug. "Finally, just the two of us," he whispered in my ear. We went up to the bedroom, and the door had barely closed when he kissed me with wild passion. Every touch, every kiss, was as if we were releasing months of pent-up desire. That night, I gave myself completely to him. The intensity of the moment was almost overwhelming. I felt the warmth of his body, the firmness of his hands, and every inch of me responded to his touch. The next day, we woke up together, entwined in the sheets. He stroked my hair and looked deeply into my eyes. "I don't want this to end," he said softly. "Neither do I," I replied, feeling a mixture of happiness and guilt. We spent the day exploring the city, laughing and enjoying each other's company. We had lunch in a charming bistro, walked hand in hand through the park, and, in the evening, went back to the hotel, where we indulged in our passion once again. On Sunday, when I returned to the condominium, I felt an intoxicating happiness. But along with it, guilt hit hard. How could I hide it from David? He was at home, watching TV. When I came in, he stood up to greet me with a hug. "How was the conference?" he asked. "It was great, very productive," I replied, trying to hide the euphoria I was still feeling. The following days were a real test of emotional control. Every time I saw Jack in the condominium, my heart raced. We tried to disguise it, but the tension was palpable. David began to notice my distant behavior. "Are you okay? You look worried," he said one evening while we were having dinner. "I'm fine, just a bit tired," I lied again. Jack's messages continued, getting bolder and bolder. He described our times together, his desires, and this kept me in a constant state of excitement. At the same time, guilt was eating me up inside. Looking at David, who suspected nothing, was a daily challenge. One evening, Jack sent me a message. "I can't stop thinking about you. When are we going to see each other again?" I replied quickly, my heart racing. Soon, I need to see you. The clandestine meetings became part of my routine. Every time I left the house, I made up a new excuse. I have to work late. I'm meeting a friend. I have a last-minute meeting. David trusted me, and that made my betrayal seem even crueler. I was living two parallel lives. With David, I tried to keep things normal, but my thoughts were always on Jack. Every touch, every kiss, every moment with him was a mixture of adrenaline and pleasure. The line between guilt and happiness became increasingly blurred. Jack and I continued to meet, our passion becoming more and more intense. The difficulty of hiding the marks of betrayal and the increasingly elaborate lies made my life a real game of hide and seek. But despite everything, I couldn't stop. I was addicted to the adrenaline, the danger, and, above all, Jack. That night, as I lay next to David, my heart was divided. I knew that at any moment everything could fall apart, but at that moment, I was willing to take the risk. The routine of clandestine encounters and keeping up appearances was a balancing act that gradually became part of my life. I found myself getting more and more involved with Jack, not just physically, but also emotionally. The initial attraction I felt at that party in the condominium turned into something deeper and more complex. I knew I was taking too many risks, but the truth was that I couldn't stop. One morning, after another night of unbridled passion with Jack, I found David having coffee in the kitchen. He looked at me with a smile and asked, "Did you sleep well?" My heart squeezed. I was becoming an excellent liar. "Yes, very well," I replied, trying to hide the guilt in my voice. David looked at me for a moment, as if trying to decipher something in my face, but then turned his attention back to the newspaper. This was our routine now. I pretended that everything was fine, while inside I struggled between guilt and desire. Later that day, I received a message from Jack. "Meet me at the garage at 7 p.m. I read those words and felt a mixture of excitement and fear. I typed a quick reply. "Yes, I'll be there." At 6:30 p.m., I started to get ready. I told David I was going to the market to buy a few things that were missing. He just nodded, immersed in a TV program. I left the house with my heart racing, feeling the adrenaline rush through my body. When I got to the garage, Jack was already there. He pulled me into a darker corner and kissed me with an intensity that made me forget everything. I felt my body respond to his touch in a way I'd never experienced before. "I'm falling in love with you," he whispered in my ear. Those words took me by surprise. I knew I was falling in love with him too, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real and dangerous. "Me too, Jack," I replied, my voice shaking. We knew it was risky, but the bond between us was too strong to ignore. With each meeting, our emotional closeness grew. It was no longer just desire, it was something deeper. We talked about our lives, our dreams, and our fears. More and more, I found myself opening my heart to him. One evening, after one of these meetings, I came home and found David in the living room, looking at a photo of us. He looked up and asked me, "Are you happy, Emma?" That question took me by surprise. I felt a knot forming in my throat. How can I answer that without revealing everything? Of course, David. Why the question? I tried to turn away, but he looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You've been different lately. Distant. I just want to make sure that everything is okay between us." I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I knew I was betraying his trust, but at the same time, I couldn't stay away from Jack. He had become an essential part of my life, and the thought of losing him terrified me. "It's all right, David. I've just been a bit stressed with work," I lied, hoping he would believe me. David pulled me into a hug, and I felt my heart break. He was a good man, and I was destroying his trust. The meetings with Jack continued, and with them, the feeling of living two parallel lives. By day, I was the devoted wife at David's side. At night, I was the passionate lover, devoted to Jack. The adrenaline of keeping this secret was addictive, but also exhausting. On one of these dates, Jack looked me in the eye and said, "Emma, I don't want to be just a secret anymore. I want you for myself, completely." Those words left me in shock. I knew I was falling in love with him, but the idea of leaving David to be with Jack was frightening. "Jack, I want that too, but it's complicated. David doesn't deserve this." He held my face in his hands and kissed me softly. "I know, Emma, but we need to decide what we want for our lives." Those words kept echoing in my mind. I knew that eventually I would have to make a choice. Continuing to live this double life was unsustainable. But for now, I wasn't ready to give up either of them. The days went by and I found myself increasingly divided. The lies piled up and the guilt grew. However, the bond with Jack only grew stronger. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but the truth was that I didn't want to stop. Jack had become a part of me, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. So we continued our clandestine encounters, keeping up appearances and living this forbidden passion. I knew I was risking too much, but I couldn't resist. Betrayal became part of my life, and I accepted it, even though I knew the risks and the possible consequences.